where normally, you might fit 3 or 4 extras at the same time and have a pool of clothes, and then, one person tries something on. If it doesn't work with them, the next person tries it on. That's not going to work, and that's where we're going to have to be very organized.
We're here to speak to the team from the upcoming feature film Mothering Sunday, which is currently in pre-production and due to start filming towards the end of September.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. It's great to have you. Liz, Helen and Sandy, we so appreciate you jumping on today. I'm going to jump right in, and I just want to start asking you some questions because I know we all want to hear what's been going on. So this is a question for Liz. Liz, what stage was Mothering Sunday in before lockdown, and what essential steps did you have to take to get back into pre-production?
We were aiming for a shoot in late spring, early summer. And then everything kicked off in mid-March. I thought, well, let's organize a Zoom and bring everyone together that we have on board. And just have a conversation of, look, we're going to try and move forward. And in mine and Stephen's head, the autumn seemed, I don't know why, I just had this inkling that the autumn seemed like a time we should go for. And I think that was really important to bring everyone together. I hadn't quite expected that it was going to sort of spiral into a COVID place where we might have felt more anxious leaving the call than we did, Sandy and Helen can say, coming in. But then the next thing that happened, but everyone joined and everyone wanted to talk. And that was a really important first step for me, was to bring people together, to share anxieties, share expectations, and share also a desire to do what we do. This job, it's what we do in our lives. It's how we express ourselves. And it's important for emotional and psychological and intellectual fulfillment, as well as financial, to live your life. And then the second thing that was seminal was, I thought, well, let's have a socially distanced, I didn't even really know what it meant, but I thought, let's have a socially distanced recce. And sent an email to the heads of department, knew that Eva, who was in France, couldn't join, but she could join by FaceTime. Sent an email to the heads of department saying, look, you're not under any obligation to come, but if you would like to, I'm inviting you to this recce. And what was amazing is that Sandy wouldn't have come to a recce like that in any way, but Helen and her team and others said, yes, we'll be there. And the drive from my home to, where do we go, Helen? Outside of Henley. That drive was really freaky because I hadn't been out that far ever. And the recce was fantastic. We all wore our masks and gloves and we stood apart, and Ava joined by FaceTime. But when I got home that night, I just felt completely wiped out. And it was only then that the import of having that day together, but also the mountain to climb ahead. So I think I went to sleep for about 15 hours and then got up the next day and thought, okay,
it's pretty emotional.
It was intense.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. So Helen and Sandy, you're obviously back at work now and in the swing of things. So how did it feel coming back? And where were you actually getting your guidance from for your specific departments?
I was ready to go back to work. But I was also very pleased to go back on something that was sort of fairly small and contained. I mean, the last few things I've done have been enormous. And just the thought of doing something little and intimate with people that I know well was exciting, and I thought manageable under the circumstances. So I was excited to go back to work. And I have to say that so far, I haven't really noticed a huge amount of difference. Now that will change, and I think that is going to change. I mean, apart from the very beginning, because I'm working out of Angels of Costumiers, because that's the only place we can work. And we started 3 weeks ago here, or 3.5 weeks ago. And they had only just opened up and the hours were limited. So we were forced we couldn't get in here till 10 o'clock. And then we had to leave by 4:30. That's a very short working day. And as you know, you start work and you want to do a 12-hour day straight away and you can't. So that was a little frustrating and a little limited, but also I knew that obviously we had to abide by the rules that they were imposing. So basically so far, everything that we have done COVID related has been sort of dictated by the building that we're in, which is Angels, and they spent the lockdown doing a considerable amount of work, getting the building organised and reorganised and safe. You know, they've made, there just seems to be a lot more space than usual, but then to begin with, there weren't that many people here. So that's really the guidelines that we've been based on, apart from the general ones that we know anyway, and the common sense ones about masks and sanitisation and all the rest of it.
I had a bit of a warm up for coming back to shooting, coming back to being in production, because I'd done some additional photography in April and May for the last shoot I did. So that was very stringently, you know, protected COVID-wise, and so it kind of normalised things. Having that experience helped us come back into this pre-production, and I brought quite a lot of the same people with me who were on that. So in a sense, we've had a kind of rehearsal and realised that it isn't a terrifying thing. You know, we have to try and, you know, proceed in the best way that we can under the circumstances, and just be very mindful of all the protocols that are in place, the measures that are in place, and then just try and, you know, obviously they can't cover all eventualities, those guidelines.
So that leads me on to obviously suppliers and contractors.
Well, at the moment I am only working in one place with Angels, but then we've gone to some other companies as well. I actually went to Paris on 2 occasions to go to costume houses there. That was interesting. And then, you know, I mean, that was the first time I'd worn a mask for about 14 hours continuously, because it had to started at Eurostar, the whole train journey, the taxi journey, and then the entire time there in the costume houses pulling costumes. Wow. And then all the way back home. And that was actually, I mean, you know, that was hard. That was actually hard work doing that, and an exhausting day. But you know, we managed to do the job in the same way that we would normally. We managed to get somewhere else. So in that sense, we haven't really been adversely affected at all.
It's just the prop houses have limited opening hours because a lot of people are still furloughed. So you might have to make an appointment. You can't just walk in anymore, you know. So it's all about planning, really, being prepared and planning ahead as far as you can. Doing a lot more online probably as well, and also actually location hunting has changed a bit as well in that respect, because people are nervous about you going to their house to have a look around. Some people have just said no, we are not ready for that. We've been concentrating on trying to find multi-purpose locations with lots of space, sort of elements of construction inside a larger house or building, just so that there's more space within that building for people to move around and to be present.
Have you had to rearrange scripts and maybe scenes?
We just were very, very fortunate to have a screenplay that was based around the intimate, both in terms of its emotional narrative and also the space that it occupies. It all takes place just outside of London. And so it was a script that just happened to suit the pandemic times, and that was just chance. There were some minor things, like Alice Birch had written minor things, and Helen can tell you there was a grocery store scene that it said, you know, filled with people. And I had to say to Alice, but that's in the past. In the new script, for some reason, there aren't that many people getting their vegetables today. And but Helen was brilliant, because Helen came up with some reference photographs of some shops that sort of are set up largely outside. So we were able to find that sweet spot where the COVID restrictions met the aesthetic realities of the period. And that's what you aim for always with filmmaking, is you're always in a situation, normally it's, you know, you try and find the sweet spot where the budgetary constraints meet the aesthetic demands. And as a producer, you know that no one's going to sit and say, oh, they were over budget or they were under budget, but obviously you have responsibility to both sides, and you know, you're charting a very fine space, and there's no point in hiring the likes of Sandy and Helen if you can't try and give them the tools that they need to do the best job possible. So it's sort of the same with COVID, is you're trying to find a way to manage the restrictions without it impacting, you know, adversely on the aesthetic demands.
There are eating scenes. There's an evening meal, you know, quite a long scene around an evening meal, and there's an outdoor lunch as well, where not a lot of food is eaten, but you know, because it's you know, it's a lunch full of tension.
Okay.
So I mean, obviously we get a home economist in, and they have their own COVID policy. So we'll just have to match that with what production are trying to do as well.
How will you be, I suppose, maintaining costumes?
Costumes are all going to be kept completely separately. I mean, they're not all going to be jammed together on the wardrobe, and they'll all be on the wardrobe shop, but they'll all have their separate sections, and each costume is going to be, you know, in plastic bags with zips, and everything's going to be, you know, washed. The things that are washable will be washed every day, and the things that are cleanable. And, you know, you can do a lot with steaming.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, the maintenance, I think, is not going to be difficult. I think it's going to be trickiest for us when we're fitting extras. Where normally, you know, you might fit 3 or 4 extras at the same time and have a pool of clothes, and then, you know, one person tries something on. If it doesn't work with them, the next person tries it on. That's not going to work, and that's where we're going to have to be very organised. Either we don't fit 2 similar sized people at the same time. We do them like a few days apart, so we can then use the same costumes, having sanitized them in between, or we have to fit completely different kinds of people sort of simultaneously. I mean, we haven't started that yet, and as I say, that's going to require planning, and I think our fittings are going to have to be more spaced out. We're not going to get as many fittings done in one day as we would normally do.
I think the time thing is you know, leads on to locations again, you know, dress locations, and trying to separate out time spent in their set dressing, leaving it stand for 72 hours and then shooting. But we can't do that in our schedule because we just can't do that. You know, it's too expensive to do that. So we're going to have to talk about ways of ensuring that the set is clean and safe before the shooting crew go in.
Right.
We've elected not to use the fog, you know, the disinfecting fog. Because it's there, you know, people have doubts about its general health.
Right. Yeah. Respiratory and everything. Yeah.
Cleaning. Yeah. And letting the set stand for as long as possible.
What there won't be any allowance of is last minute decisions. You know, everything has to be decided in advance, and there can't be any last minute changes of mind.
So if you could rewind back to the very beginning, is there anything that you would do differently now?
Kind of feels normal, except you've got this kind of, it's like, you know, when you remember, got something in the back of your mind all the time that you forget about largely, but then, you know, sometimes it becomes very pertinent and you have to remember it very clearly, you know, but most of the time you're still kind of wrapped up in your own little kind of world, getting on with things the way you always did.
Have you got any tips?
Hammer home the point that decisions need to be made early, you know, our script was ready, but you know, it's like Sandy says, there's no time or space for last minute decisions or changes.
We need as much information up front as possible. Everything that as much information up front as possible. And again, repeating what Helen said is, you know, decisions have to be made and adhered to. Okay. Which is difficult because, I mean, sometimes you do your best work at the last minute.
I suppose it was very challenging as a production to work remotely for such an extended period of time. We only came into the office last week, and the production is a kind of the nerve center in a way where everything gets filtered through on a planning level. Realizing once you are working with your group of people, how important it is to be in a room together. And there's something about face-to-face communication when you're making a film which really couldn't be replicated fully by technology.
So I know that this movie is quite an intimate movie, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Talk about relationships. So how is that going to work in regards to, I suppose, close proximity of cast members and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's going to be about testing, and you know, we've got testing in place, and it's going to be about the very sensible things that are right at the heart of this that people are saying is wearing masks, washing your hands, wiping surfaces down, Obviously there are intimate scenes, and so that is about testing those two individuals and putting everything in place. And, you know, look, you can only manage the risk. We can't completely get rid of the risk, but it's manageable. And the agents and the cast members have got all of the COVID guidelines, and they're well aware of what's going on. And again, there's just a willingness to work and to be as safe and sensible as we can be.
We do very much appreciate you taking time out in your day.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.